Right.
The paper trail. Let's go, 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 go. Yeah, 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 yeah. For the love of money, niggas come around. For the love of money, some stay around. For the love of money, what a nigga will do. For the love of the money, money. Yeah. I gotta shake it. 12 at night to 5 in the morning. They don't give a fuck now. If it's for the money, niggas gon' bark and they bite like a motherfucking dog. Gotta party like a motherfucking dog. For that cat, I am gon' roof and I'm barking at that cat, and I am gon' take the roof off when I'm right. I'm swerving with a purpose, with a purpose. A nigga been sipping on that purple. A nigga been cheaping on that purple. Cause I'm getting money, I'm getting money. Cause I'm getting money. And I'm laughing all the way to the motherfucking bank. And I'm telling her, tell me later if she thinking what I'm thinking. Damn me getting money.
The CIA, Palantir, and more. Talks about the history and how it all began. Things that we might not know, things that we might already know, but it's just a little bit of an insight as far as what we're seeing now and why it is the way it is now. And so that we can pay closer attention to Palantir, that we know that the co-founder CEO Alex Karp and the founder Peter Thiel, who has his hands in every cookie jar, are as crazy as they come and are as anti-humanity as they come. You can look up a lot of comments, interviews, and you can see that these are not normal human beings. They seem a little bit deranged, if you ask me. Anyways, without further ado, let's take a closer look at this interview with Whitney Webb.
Work about how Facebook was essentially launched as a resurrection of a failed DARPA program called LifeLog by the same person that resurrected the failed DARPA program, Total Information Awareness, one of the most insane surveillance proposals ever in U.S. history, resurrected as Palantir. You can thank Peter Thiel for that, co-founder of PayPal. A lot of these cells become huge. For example, there's a good Insurge Intelligence called How the CIA Made Google. If you look at a lot of these companies, you will find intelligence agencies Okay, so in the case of like US intelligence, if you go back to the very beginning, and there's even CIA like deputy directors that have said that, it was all Wall Street people at the beginning. It was Wall Street lawyers, it was Wall Street bankers. And since that point, from the genesis of the CIA, there's been revolving doors between CIA and Wall Street that have continued up until today. And really, you could look at the CIA as a public-private enterprise in some sense. It's a public security agency, but it's more or less functioned throughout its history as Wall Street's secret police. That's why its earliest coups, for example, like its first coup in Guatemala, that was done on behalf of United Fruit, a major multinational corporation headquartered in the United States, which interestingly enough was later acquired by Leon Black's father and then Leslie Wetzner's business mentor. And then you also have, like the coup in Iran over like Anglo-American oil, like them losing their holdings there. The coup in 1973 in Chile, you can argue it was because of efforts to nationalize copper and all these largely Western mining companies losing out, and then they come in and do a coup and what have you. It's really been symbiotic for some time. And I think, as we moved into the information age, the CIA saw an opportunity. The internet from the very beginning was, it originally started as ARPANET, a project of the Pentagon. And for anyone that really wants to know about that history, I would highly recommend the book Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine. It was essentially created in Vietnam as a counterinsurgency program. That was the goal of it, by the same people that were involved in things like the Phoenix program, which was the first instance of, military intelligence, at least US military intelligence, using databases to come up with names of dissidents and then assassinating them. And a lot of them weren't actually dissidents, like suspected dissidents or neighbors of dissidents and all of this stuff. And then from Phoenix program, it goes, all these CIA-backed dictatorships like Pinochet in Chile, for example, Operation Condor, use the exact same system. And they've been building these systems with the internet even before the modern internet as we use it now existed. And so a lot of these there were efforts early on to kingmake the companies who would come to dominate the internet. And that has happened. It's just a matter of public record. If you look at the biggest companies in big tech, I've done work about how Facebook was essentially launched as a resurrection of a failed DARPA program called LifeLog by the same person that resurrected the failed DARPA program, Total Information Awareness, one of the most insane surveillance proposals ever in US history, resurrected as Palantir. You can thank Peter Thiel for that, co-founder of PayPal. A lot of these other companies that have become huge, Google, for example, there's a good article by Nafez Ahmed published at Insurge Intelligence called How the CIA Made Google. If you look at a lot of these companies, you will find intelligence agencies at the beginning. Palantir, I mentioned earlier, took In-Q-Tel money, developed very closely with the CIA. It began at PayPal. It's a PayPal spin-off, Palantir is. Oracle, another huge company in Silicon Valley. Larry Ellison, before he started Oracle, was working on Project Oracle at the CIA on databases and was the infrastructure for Oracle as we know it now. A lot of these, there's been a lot of, symbiosis between intelligence agencies and these big companies for a long time, and they couldn't have done it without venture capital. And that's arguably why the CIA launched In-Q-Tel in the late 90s, because they wanted to become big players in Silicon Valley. Because when you decide who the kingmakers are, well, there's a lot of things actually to be said about that. So what I mentioned earlier about like total information awareness, this is a program that was just deemed so insane in the early 2000s that essentially every mainstream media publication railed against it and rights group railed against it. But then when they relaunched the same program essentially as a private entity, as a private sector entity, no one complained. And so the CIA for a long time and other intelligence agencies have followed this exact playbook, specifically Israeli intelligence. When you move into the private sector, you can get away with a lot more than you can in the public sector sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do. And so there have been efforts to do that, I would argue, for a very long time. And if you look at how these big tech companies have developed, and for example, revelations from the Snowden leaks, just like how the extent to which these private companies, how much of your data that they're selling or passing to US intelligence for warrantless surveillance. I mean, they've been collaborators of this for a very, very long time. And I think there really hasn't been enough scrutiny of that. And I would really argue that a lot of these companies operate more often than not as intelligence fronts. And it's kind of gotten to the point too, where in US specifically, the people behind these very big tech, the biggest of the big tech companies, are also the main donors to the two US political parties. You have like Peter Thiel on the Republican side, you have Reid Hoffman on the Democrat side, Eric Schmidt on the Democrat side. I mean, they fund our politicians and they dominate our private sector infrastructure, especially as we've been forced to be more online, specifically since the COVID era. And the goal is to have things digitalize even further and have it all be on these people's systems and have us become completely dependent on their infrastructure. And these people are in bed with intelligence. And even aside from the intelligence connections, they have a lot of dirty laundry. Why did Jeffrey Epstein have connections with almost every big tech oligarch in the United States? I mean, not enough people have bothered to ask that question. Why were so many of them subpoenaed during the JP Morgan Epstein case in the US Virgin Islands that ended up being settled? I forget how much JP Morgan paid to make it all go away, but a lot of money. All I really want to add to that is that it's important to keep in mind that when the petrodollar system has been, the standard for keeping the dollar, the global, or reserve currency, the US has gone to war, killed millions of people to defend that. The likely motivations, obviously there's more than one, but one of the key ones in invading Iraq, I would argue, was the fact that Saddam Hussein, not long before the invasion, had started selling oil in euros instead of dollars and made a lot more money, showing by example to other, other OPEC members that they could make more money selling in different currencies than the dollar. And then, of course, you have the case of Libya in 2011, where Gaddafi was trying to move to a gold-backed currency called the dinar and was selling that to African countries, a lot of which either use dollars or they use, French financial stuff. And that's why you had the US and France essentially lead that regime change operation with devastating consequences for Libya, which used to be the safest country in Africa, then became the most dangerous, and has been cited as an example of or a reason for why immigration got so out of control in Europe after that point. So there are cases where the U.S. government, or rather U.S. empire, is willing to go to extreme lengths to defend the dollar. So the idea that they would just sit idly by and just let dollarization happen without having some sort of plan in the works, especially knowing that they couldn't keep this going indefinitely and that the world was going to move at some point to a post-oil economy. I think it's important to keep in mind that these people have been very serious and played very dirty and created insane instability just to keep the dollar the global reserve currency, because it gives a lot of advantages just to the US. And I fully feel that they intend to keep those advantages, even if it means a different system. And dollarization has happened in specific Latin American countries in the past, Ecuador, for example, El Salvador. And what happens then is that when they're dollarized, those countries lose their financial sovereignty. They become dependent on decisions of the Fed, and a lot of consequences come from that. So this is an effort by the same architects of even those instances in Ecuador and El Salvador to essentially foist the same thing on Latin America, but under a more, it doesn't seem like overt dollarization when it's stablecoins that aren't directly connected to the US government, but they are connected directly to the US Treasury system, for example. And then we also have some of these companies that Zappo are connected to, for example, that are also backed by this Endeavor company that is the focus of this piece, like Satellogic, which was also a key focus of our previous article, Debt from Above. And if you look at the board on Satellogic, you have the former head of the Treasury Department, Steve Mnuchin, Howard Lutnick of Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the main people involved in the Treasury system. And then you have someone from the Rohatyn Group. And the Rohatyn Group is named for Nick Rohatyn, who basically led the Latin American debt policies of JP Morgan throughout the 1980s, netting the bank an insane amount of money and really aggravating the Latin American debt crisis as we know it today. So why are all those people on the board of the satellite company, for example? And why do these people pop up at Zappo? Why are these people that also are, involved in stablecoins like PayPal, for example, with PYUSD, why are they all over Endeavor, the PayPal mafia? I think it's so much that it's very hard to ignore and write it off as a coincidence. Yeah. I would add about the Tether play. I think it's really similar, but in reverse of what Elon Musk is doing. So Tether started off with money, stablecoin, right? Over a social network, arguably for the user data. And now he's turning or has made it very explicit his intentions to turn Twitter X into a bank that he hopes to be half of the financial system. Why is that happening? It's very odd. And then when you can consider all these PayPal link ups, well, of course, Musk being a co-founder of PayPal, it's all very and the big picture is that countries like Argentina and also Lebanon and several countries throughout the world have been targeted by economic warfare for a very long time. Argentina is a very good example. You could argue it began in the 70s and the 80s, and with the economic policy. I mean, when Argentina was a military dictatorship, some of the financial policies they adopted were completely insane. You had a neoliberal in power during the 90s who was very bad for Argentina, in my opinion, Carlos Menem. And then you had their economic collapse policies, both of the dictatorship and of Menem's presidency. And then you have the IMF come in and all these other entities. And what they try and do after the 2001 economic collapse is have Argentina engage in things like debt for land swaps, debt for resources swaps. And this has been going on not just in Argentina, but lots of, most of Latin America, arguably, for a very long time, and it's a resource grab. Some of what we allude to in this piece, and what we hope to allude to in upcoming reports and a book, is that a lot of the people that I've written about and that Mark's written about and that we've written about together are the engineers of that expressly. And by blowing out Latin American debt in the 80s and 90s, it was a way to basically yoke Latin America to the United States, or more broadly, a lot of transnational economic interests that are based in the United States, like Wall Street banks, for example. They engineered a lot of this. So the situation in Argentina now didn't just come out of nowhere. And obviously Argentina's central bank has a lot of the blame, but that also didn't happen in a vacuum. Presidents appointed the heads of the central bank that made those policies. And even someone like Milei, who's railed against the Central Bank of Argentina, put a former central bank president in a top post in his cabinet. So, these are choices that have been made by politicians. As someone who's been and reported from the ground on Argentina and on Argentinian politics, the corruption there, they just don't even, there's politicians in Argentina that don't even try to hide how corrupt they are. It's just flagrant in some instances in a way like I've never experienced anywhere else in the entire world. So I honestly think that what's happening in Argentina, yes, those people may need stable coins because of the current economic situation, but I think it was engineered to be that way. They were engineered into that position. And who benefits from that? The same people that I would argue created the solution and created the problem. A lot of the talking points by prominent Bitcoin influencers for some time has been this is a solution to irresponsible central bank policy, government fiscal policy, things like that, and a debt-based monetary system in general, fiat, what have you. And so what are the implications then of the system that's aiming to, yoke the dollar to that and use it to perpetuate the dollar? I think people should seriously be asking themselves, because right now you have Bitcoin only companies taking lots of money from Tether and being we're going to use the dollar to make Bitcoin stronger and stuff. But you can't do that and then also be fiat bad, central bank bad, and then just essentially team up with that same system. I mean, it just seems kind of weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so, personally.
The adoption agency Epstein used to traffic the children. Susan Hamblin was an assistant to Ellie's adoption agency. It worked with families in the United States and Ecuador. Now, there's a controversial email that has surfaced. The sender is redacted, but as you can see, the name is Susan Hamblin. If you look close enough, it's dated June 30th, 2014. Now, below, Susan sends an email. It says, "I give you permission to kill him. He is with Olga. He lied to you, and he lied to me." Epstein replies saying, "Whoops." To which Susan says, "No one will lie to you and get away with it from me. No one." Whoops is correct. Now, what's insane is that this is the only time Susan's name appears in the files, and this email is the only way we even knew her name. Nowhere does her name appear. The only way we found the name is due to this redaction mistake. Now, it's unconfirmed, but this woman might be the Olga she's referring to. But once you go down the rabbit hole, you then ask, well, Epstein trafficked children. Where did he get them from? And of course, setting up who's going to have a paper trail of kids who have no parents, essentially? You understand the thinking? So this paints Susan as a key figure in the trafficking network, with the adoption agency serving as a potential pipeline for victims. In July 2020, The Sun, a British newspaper, published 3 articles. There was also a video making serious allegations against Susan. These articles claimed that she groomed and procured young women to be exploited by Epstein, and told the victims that Epstein would kill them if ever they spoke out. Posts and Reddit threads. But it was this email I'm talking about that opened this can of worms. And there's so much more. So here's another link to Susan. There's a man named Jay Hamblin. He died November 25th, 2013. In his obituary, a donation can be made, but look at who the donation is addressed to. Furthermore, the board of directors of the Kids to Families organization includes a man named Paul Lawrence. He was married to Susan Hamblin. However, Paul died in 2014. Again, in this obituary, there's a donation link to kids to families. There's always a death tied to Epstein. Do you see what I mean? It's believed through this network, some of the youngest trafficked were 5 years old. Some were above 14. Many were. How many more age? He can't have just had the one. This brings us on to LifeTouch, one of the most prominent school photography companies in America. There are many districts around America who've cancelled the photo day at school because of claims that Apollo Management, they were the ones that owned LifeTouch. Their CEO, billionaire Leon Black, he's named in the Epstein files. He may have accessed the children's photos. Leon Black regularly met with Epstein and was advised by Epstein on financial matters. However, LifeTouch CEO Ken Murphy said in an Instagram post that neither Leon Black nor any of Apollo's directors or investors had any access to LifeTouch photos. So you got the kids to families, right? Adoption agency. Then you got the school photograph agency, and you can see the link there to Epstein. Was there more? Are there further dots to connect? Think about it. How did he keep a lot of his victims quiet? Some point, some will talk, but how did he sweeten them up? How did he keep them loyal? Well, he promised them, I'll get you into Harvard, I'll get you into Columbia, I'll get you into this club, I'll get you into that club. Here's an email asking for a YMCA basketball schedule. Was he keeping tabs on someone he placed there? Furthermore, in 2012, he launched Southern Trust Company, operating from his private island. The company's purpose was to provide DNA data mining services. But what made this enterprise intriguing was the reported revenue of over $200 million. According to the New York Times, the filings revealed that Southern Trust received a $30 million loan in its first year, though the source of this financing was never disclosed. By 2013, Southern Trust's first full operational year, the company reported income of $51 million terms. Mathematical algorithms, so that if I am predisposed to cancer, I can have my genes sequenced to cure that. This is very similar to the business model of 23andMe. Yes, the genetics company. If Epstein was genuinely engaged in DNA analysis, who was providing large DNA databases and the financial resources to pay such extraordinary fees? He had 23andMe given him DNA data. You see, before Epstein died to Bill Gates as the executor of his estate, both Nikolic and Gates appeared on Epstein's flight logs. Nikolic later became the lead fundraiser for Editas Medicine, a DNA startup co-founded by George Church, an Epstein collaborator. The company's first investors included Bill Gates and Google, and this brings us back to 23andMe. It was founded by Anne Wojcicki, who was married to Google co-founder Sergey Brin when she launched the company. Sergey is also in the Epstein files. Google pioneered the business model of offering free software while monetizing users' personal data through advertising. 23andMe advanced this concept further. The company charges consumers to provide their DNA, which it then sells to pharmaceutical companies and research institutions such as Jeffrey Epstein's Trust. Do you know who else were early investors in 23andMe? Harvey Weinstein, Wendy Murdoch. They would host promotional parties and distribute free testing kits at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Their marketing strategy focused on collecting DNA from celebrities and global elites, raising questions about why they prioritize genetic material from the world's most powerful individuals. They were them, and all us normies on the ground, they were collecting our us and maybe even children. Epstein socialized with Wojcicki and Brin at dinners, even after his 2008 conviction. There's photographs capturing Epstein at the same table as Google executive Marissa Mayer, as well as other prominent figures. By 2012, 23andMe raised over $100 million. One of their investors, A.B. Krongrad, was a former CIA executive director at the beginning. They also oversaw the Microsoft IPO that made Bill Gates a billionaire. It's like these connections just never end. A.B. Krongrad even purchased a home 2 miles from Epstein's Palm Beach residence in 2018. So do you see the connections now from the different agencies collecting data? I want to end this video by going through one last document to give you the kind of depravity that these children or these young adults were going through. Here is a letter that was written. It says, close your eyes, close your eyes, close your eyes. Don't speak, she doesn't talk. I can't stop shaking, it's been a week. A decision was made, but I can't tell Jeffrey. These things happen. Why didn't I close my eyes fast enough? The doctor was different again. I think from Israel. He had kind eyes, but didn't speak directly to me. This was different. A shot and those rod-like things had a hook and so much pain. It sounds like what she's describing is giving birth. GM said to push all the pain away. I don't understand. Blood and water all over the bed, and she was like a feeling when your tummy hurts. She said to close my eyes and put her hands over my eyes, but I didn't close them because of these tiny cries. I am so lost. I saw between her fingers this tiny head and body in the doctor's hands. It reached its tiny arm up and had a tiny foot. I closed my eyes and no more. Now have a look at this. That, I don't know what that is, but that looks freaky to me. For some reason, whoever wrote this document also mentioned Mar-a-Lago. So do you understand what I'm saying? For him to get individuals, children, and traffic them, he set up his own agencies in different parts. And I don't even want to think about what he did to these children. Do you get my point?
Why is one of the most private, controversial billionaires in the world suddenly linked to a viral 20-year-old influencer? Peter Thiel is not just another billionaire. He is one of the most influential gay men, and money has quietly reshaped elections. He is strategic, he is private, and he does not explain himself. For years, his name has hovered around larger cultural conversations, elite tech gatherings, ideological disruption, billionaire influence, and yes, even proximity to people like Jeffrey Epstein, who, by the way, Peter Thiel's name is listed in those files over 2,000 times. Recently, a video surfaced of Peter walking down the street when someone pressed it about his connection to Jeffrey Epstein.
Mr. Thiel, do you have any comments about Palantir's surveillance of the American people, sir? Or any of your connections to Jeffrey Epstein? People are rather concerned about that. I think the American people want this surveillance tech being used against them.
This person writes, he's walking fast because he's afraid of the people. None of the billionaires feel safe. It's a sign of their guilt, but their greed won't let them stop. They're like sick animals. They must be put down or they'll hurt all of us. This is all of our curiosity, and Peter Thiel has built had previously spoken about his relationship with Peter. In interviews, he suggested that he lived a kept life for a period of time. Though he also made it clear that his relationship was starting 3. Thomas was found dead outside of an apartment building in Miami. Authorities investigated the death as an offing of himself, and there is no evidence that Peter Thiel was involved. But to those who knew Jeff personally, they tend to think something else was going on. I knew Jeff personally and met Peter Thiel with him on our trips out to California when we both lived in Central Park South. He didn't fall off a balcony. Another person writes, dude had his boyfriend thrown off a balcony. And lastly, I'm telling you, white male billionaires are above the law in America. Unfortunately, the last one is probably not far from the truth. Let me know if you'd like a deep dive on Jeff and that horrific situation, because unfortunately, there is a lot there and it's really, really alarming. Have you ever felt like you should have a skincare routine, but have no idea where to start? As I get older, I am becoming more and more determined to find a routine that actually works for my skin. Today's video is sponsored by Geology, and what I'd like to right away is to send me this 60-second questionnaire that assessed what my skin would benefit from the most. My main focus right now is keeping my skin looking smoother, more even, and honestly just healthier as I age. They sent me their everyday face wash, which is gentle but still feels like it's doing something. Their morning cream with SPF, which I love because then I don't have to remember a separate moisturizer and sunscreen sunscreen when I travel, and the retinol night cream, which is one of the most well-researched ingredients out there for fine lines and texture. But my favorite might be the vitamin C and E ferulic serum. I've tried other vitamin C products that have left my skin feeling so greasy, and this one doesn't, which I really appreciate. Right now, you can get 80% off of your personalized skincare trial set. It's just $10 for the full 4-piece routine. Use my code and grab 80% off of your personalized skincare trial set. Thanks again to Geology for sponsoring, and now back to the video. And then there's his politics. He has funded hardline conservative candidates, including J.D. Vance, whose Senate campaign was propelled by millions from Peter Thiel himself, cementing his role as a political kingmaker, not just a Silicon Valley investor. He also co-founded Palantir, a data analytics company that has received major. I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. Chilling. Either way, Peter Thiel is not one to sit on the sidelines. With a net worth estimated around $30 billion, he does fund influence.
So, if you're evil, you're at least not bad. You're not incompetent.
He builds systems, and again, he operates very, very quietly, which is why when his name began circulating in a whole different kind of rumor, one involving a 20-year-old internet personality, people started paying attention. Why would someone like that be interested, even hypothetically, in someone whose entire brand revolves around him live streaming live, courting controversy, and literally living publicly online? It's a stark contrast. So let's break it down. To understand why Peter Thiel's name is even being whispered in this kind of a story, you have to understand the other side of it. A 20-year-old internet personality known as Clavicular. If you're over 30, you may have never heard of him. I had never heard of him until I read a New York Times article that they did on him a couple of days ago. His real name is Braden Peters. He operates inside a hyper-online subculture known as looks maxing, a world obsessed with optimizing physical attractiveness to an extreme degree.
You know about bone smashing? A bone, it grows back stronger.
Jaw lines, bone structure, testosterone, steroids. The idea that your body is just a project that can be engineered into perfection.
My mom used to take these away when I was growing up because I was always bone smashing.
And supposedly, Clavicular, who says he's straight, says that Matt Bomer has the perfect face. The New York Times writes, the looks maxing community prefers people who look like Mr. Bomer, lantern-jawed, symmetrical, white. A black man who attempted to make looks maxing content was radically harassed, Wired reported last year. Wow. And Clavicular doesn't just participate in that world, he has leaned all the way in. He has built his brand on a spectacle, and he thrives on attention. Recently, he went completely viral after a clip of him came out where he apparently gets what they call frame mogged. I guess a fan had asked to take a picture with him, and the fan apparently had a better frame or build than Clavicular. This clip exploded. The meme spread far beyond his niche audience. Suddenly, people who never heard of looks maxing or Clavicular himself knew his face. Clavicular, who goes by Clav for short, has openly talked about steroid use, extreme dieting, and even says he uses crystal meth as a method to stay skinny.
I do meth, yes. So I do meth to, basically suppress my appetite and try to get leaner.
And when your audience is as young and impressionable as Clav's is, critics argue there's a difference between transparency and influence. Regardless, Clav is not discreet, which makes what came next even stranger.
Do you know who Peter Thiel is?
Peter Thiel, yeah. He's a billionaire that owns Palantir.
I got invited to a Peter Thiel party. You think that's going to be a Diddy party? Probably.
Whew. Billionaires, they get a little creepy.
Yeah, dude, I don't know. I don't want to get diddied.
This person writes, shocking the gay billionaire would want to have Clav at his parties. Clavicular, I really love your stuff. I'd love for you to come hang out so we can talk about the Antichrist and maybe have a little fun by the balcony afterwards. Something about even seeing Peter Thiel's face in that tweet just gives me like the heebie-jeebies. Like there's something about his face that just makes my skin crawl. But that wasn't the only clip that really caught people's attention. Around the same time, Clav began talking more openly about this mysterious person who was giving him a lot of money. Someone he referred to as P. According to him, this person had sent him nearly $500,000 over the span of just a few months.
But P, he's going crazy, man. Already donated $500 and I'm giving subs. What the fuck?
Since the very beginning of Clavicular's streaming career, this mysterious person known only as P has been his #1 top donator. In Clavicular's very first week streaming on Kick alone, P dropped over $150,000 on him. Since then, he's returned during Clavicular's brief flash visit to Los Angeles, where he received an exclusive invite to a private party held at Teal's $11.5 million Hollywood Hills mansion, an event known for only admitting the absolute top echelon of society. Ever since that party, fans have been heavily speculating that P is actually billionaire Peter Thiel himself. It does seem awfully coincidental that in the first clip we see him bring up Peter Thiel, and then he starts mentioning that someone by the name of P, that he's saying is a him, is donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to him. It could just be coincidental, but there is something there. Clav has denied any association with Peter Thiel, and there are no confirmed financial transactions between the two of them.
Oh, we gotta clear this up. Are you in any way affiliated with Peter Thiel?
No.
Okay, we'll make sure. People online were thinking that you're being funded, but you got your own mission.
Correct. Yes.
Hell yeah.
There's no secret funding.
Hell yeah. Okay, just
Yeah.
gotta make that.
They say this about everyone when they become famous.
I know.
I think
know.
they were saying that because like I got my charges dropped, so they were like, "Oh my God, there's no way. There has to be some shadow organization funding."
But then another detail surfaced. In February of this year, so this month, he got arrested on 2 counts of felony offenses: forgery involving possession of a forged instrument and dangerous drug possession/use, along with 1 misdemeanor count for a minor using a false ID to enter. He was facing up to 8 years in prison. But then, 18 hours later, he walked free. A lot of people assumed that Peter Thiel bailed him out. And what makes it weirder is his lawyer had one rule.
He also cannot leave the state of Arizona. That's the big one. The big one right now is he can't leave the state of Arizona.
But then, before we knew it, he was on a plane to fly to New York for his first fashion show. To many of his followers, seeing Clav step into this fashion world felt like the next logical chapter in his viral trajectory.
Oh my God, Clavicular just looks max mogged at Elena Velez. What the fuck?
This person writes, "I feel like a proud father." Another person writes, "I haven't been happier for another person in a long time, really." So he has an audience that really loves him and cheers him on. And it really made sense to all of his followers. He had reached really the highest form of looks maxing, a viral body and an avant-garde runway. But then people started to look closer. The show was connected to designer Elena Velez, a controversial, boundary-pushing figure in fashion known for blending art, politics, and elite cultural spaces. Some of the conversations around her brand have intersected with debates about race, IQ, and human biodiversity, topics widely rejected by mainstream science. This person writes, "Elena Velez is the disgusting freak for constantly offering her throat to the Nazi right wing so that they can stick their boots in it. We need to shame people who attend her shows and shame the stylists who put talent in her garments." And, surprise, surprise, Elena has ties to Peter Thiel. It's all connected in a very weird, coincidental way. This is from her Wikipedia. Velez is alleged to be associated with scenes connected to Peter Thiel and the New Libertarian and Tech Right, collaborating with digital art collective Romelia Corporation in 2025. The scene is known for its reactionary politics and associations with Peter Thiel. Again, Clav has denied being associated with Peter Thiel in any way.
Yeah, bro.
Fucking Peter Thiel trying to get in your...
Dude, that was the craziest one. I swear. Yeah, I got blacklisted from his events now. That's what I heard.
Who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
In fact, a couple days ago, a journalist came to do some bizarre interview with him. And the minute she tried to pivot the conversation to his connections to Peter Thiel, he completely shut down the interview, turning the tables on her and saying that she was the one that had ties to Peter Thiel and he wanted nothing to do with that.
Like, you know what? Let me get $15,000.
Bless. I mean, I'm happy that you did it. Like, it was cool.
A shithead reporter who's tied to, you know, a group who's maybe not doing some great things. You know, we're gonna fuck her shit up. So, you know, we're on.
So wait, you have people, right, that are tied to.
Have a good day. Take care.
Show me the proof.
Have a good day.
This is good storytelling.
Take care.
So this is what you do.
Hey, Joe, our guest is ready to go.
Crazy. Okay, you're funny. All right, well,
Thanks for
good
coming.
stuff. I mean, shit.
It's all so strange for my mid-30-year-old self to grasp, but this connection with him and Peter Thiel does fascinate me because I can't help but notice the contrast. On one side, we have a billionaire who has built his power on privacy, control, and silence. And then on the other, a 20-year-old who broadcasts every chaotic moment in his life. It's this old world dark culture meets this new age algorithmic dark culture, but I guess it does make sense when you think about who these two people specifically are. This clavicular kid is clearly being used as a Peter Thiel pet project to promote body modification and transhumanism amongst young men. very dark. Thank you for watching today's video. I figured I'd switch it from an Epstein video just for a bit of diversity. But I'll be back in a day or so with another Epstein video. And again, I really appreciate all your support on those videos. It means so much to me to feel your love and to feel you backing me. It gives me the courage to keep going. So thank you so, so much. If you have any other video ideas you'd like to see me dive into, make sure to email me at matthew.cullen@gmail.com. You know, I think one thing that has come from the Epstein files is all of our general distaste for billionaires. And I guess it's been somewhat refreshing to see them all being exposed for who they really are. So I'm ready to dive deep into anyone else you want to see me dive deep into. Should we know? And again, if you've been meaning to upgrade your skincare, use my code and grab 80% off of your personalized skincare trial set. It's just $10. Thank you again for watching today's video, and I will see you soon with another video. Okay, bye.
Colossus is located right next to it because it's estimated to use up to 5 million gallons of water per day. The power grid in Memphis was never designed to support anything like this or a data center this big. So what does the richest person in the world do when a major city can't supply enough power to their AI system that generates edgy jokes and child abuse material? This is some 2026 trivia for you. Well, I flew a drone over the facility earlier this week so you and some regulators could see. And if you guessed methane gas turbines, congratulations. And just a few hours before recording this, the EPA confirmed that using methane turbines to power data centers is, in fact, illegal and violates the Clean Air Act. If you're wondering why they're illegal, it's because they emit heaping amounts of nitrogen oxide. That is, will anybody be arrested for this or even fined for it? Or will they even be forced to stop doing it? And if not,
I was raised like most people, taught that taxation is simply the price of civilization, roads, courts, armies, the social contract. You pay your share. It hasn't. The deeper I looked, the more that assumption, that bedrock certainty, began to dissolve. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, the way a reflection breaks when you throw a stone into still water. Here is the fact that started everything. One sentence buried in a footnote of a 1911 congressional debate transcript I found in a university archive, digitized almost as an afterthought. The American citizen has never in the history of this republic been compelled to surrender a portion of his labor directly to the federal government. Think about that. Not a fringe pamphlet, not a conspiracy document, a congressional record, official, entered into the legislative history of the United States of America. And then, 2 years later, everything changed. The 16th Amendment was ratified in February 1913. By October of that same year, Americans filed their first federal income tax returns. Not hundreds of years of taxation, not gradual evolving policy, a single year, a single amendment, a single pivot point in history, after which the entire relationship between a citizen and their government transformed permanently. And here's the strangest part. Nobody seemed to ask why. Let me take you back. Not to 1913, further, to the world your great-great-grandparents actually inhabited. For most of recorded American history, from the founding through the early 20th century, the federal government operated primarily on tariffs, import duties, excise taxes on specific goods, alcohol, tobacco, sometimes luxury items. These were taxes on transactions, on commerce, not on the labor of individual citizens, not on what you earned, not on the time you spent building your life. The distinction matters more than it sounds. A tariff touches you when you choose to buy something from abroad. An excise tax touches you when you choose to purchase a taxed good. But an income tax touches you simply for existing as a productive person. It reaches into the transaction between you and your employer, or between you and your land, your craft, your skill, and says, before you can call this yours, we take a portion. That had never happened before. Not at the federal level, not in peacetime. There was a brief income tax during the Civil War. Brief. It was repealed in 1872. Then the Supreme Court struck down another attempt in 1895, constitutional in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. The legal reasoning was clear. A direct tax on income unapportioned among the states violated the Constitution. Amendment in under 2 decades is presented to us as simple democratic evolution. The progressives wanted it, the people supported it, it passed. End of story. But the official explanation collapses here, because when you examine who actually supported the 16th Amendment, when you look not at the rhetoric, but at the funding, the lobbying, the back-channel communications now available in historical archives, the picture becomes considerably more complicated. Ask yourself a simple question. Who benefits when the government gains a permanent, elastic, expandable claim on individual income? Not the farmer in Ohio, not the craftsman in Pennsylvania, not the miner in Colorado. When you follow the institutional support for the income tax amendment through the congressional record, you find something interesting. The most vocal advocates were not the poor, for whom the tax was supposedly designed as a tool of redistribution. They were the architects of large financial institutions, men who understood, perhaps better than anyone, that a government empowered to tax income is also a government empowered to borrow against future tax revenue, to grow, to spend, to expand its financial obligations. And in that same year, 1913, something else happened. The Federal Reserve Act was signed into law in December. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. 2 transformative pieces of financial legislation. Same year, one giving the government unlimited access to citizen income, the other creating a centralized banking system capable of managing the government's debt. Not coincidence, not timing, not bureaucratic accident. A coordinated architecture. This raises a simple but critical question. What kind of federal government, what kind of system requires both simultaneously? What expansion of scope and function demands that a government simultaneously gain the ability to tax income and create a central bank to manage debt in the same calendar year? That's not fiscal policy, that's infrastructure for something new, for something larger than what existed before. Consider the speed. In 1912, there is no federal income tax enforcement apparatus, no auditors, no investigators with federal criminal authority, no agency empowered to seize your wages, your bank accounts, your property. None of it exists because none of it is needed. The infrastructure matches the law, zero tax, zero enforcement machine. By 1919, 6 years later, the Bureau of Internal Revenue employs thousands. It has regional offices in cities across the country. It has an intelligence division, a special agents unit with prosecutorial referral authority. Physical buildings, purpose-built or commandeered, operating in coordinated networks from Boston to San Francisco. Ask yourself, how does that happen in 6 years? Not decades of gradual institutional evolution, not slow bureaucratic accumulation, not the organic growth of a government agency finding its footing. 6 years, from nothing to a nationally coordinated enforcement empire with investigators, auditors, criminal referral authority, and the architectural footprint to house all of it simultaneously through the National Archives, the more the timeline becomes genuinely difficult to explain. Field offices appeared in cities that had no particular tax base justifying their scale. Training manuals for special agents were printed and distributed before the ink on enabling legislation had fully dried. The apparatus preceded the need, or matched it with a precision that suggests the need was anticipated far earlier than the public record acknowledges. The official explanation is wartime expansion, progressive era institutional confidence, the natural machinery of a modernizing state. But institutional architecture doesn't materialize fully formed. It gets designed, it gets planned. Someone drew the org chart before the amendment passed. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The enforcement machine wasn't built to serve the tax. The tax was the justification for building the machine. I spent weeks in archive rooms, the smell of old paper, the fragility of documents that were never meant to survive this long for posterity. What I found was not a single smoking gun. It never is. It's always a pattern. It's always accumulation. The congressional debates leading up to the 16th Amendment are remarkable for what they don't discuss. There is almost no extended debate about what happens after the amendment, almost no projection of where rates might go, almost no serious discussion of enforcement mechanisms, of penalties, of what willful failure to file might mean in practice. Why? Because in 1913, the top marginal rate was 7% on incomes over $500,000. The vast majority of Americans paid nothing at all. The tax, as initially presented, was almost symbolic, a gesture, a precedent. Not a permanent restructuring of the relationship between citizen and state, just a small, reasonable measure. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The same architecture appears again and again throughout history. A new power is introduced at its most modest, least threatening scale, a small tax, a temporary measure, an emergency provision, and then, gradually, then suddenly, it expands to fill whatever space is available. By 1944, the top marginal income tax rate in the United States was 94%. 94%. The evidence suggests something much larger was at work than a simple progressive tax reform. The initial rates weren't the point. The mechanism was the point, the precedent, the constitutional permission. The crime wasn't what they took in 1913. The crime was what they made possible. Here is where it gets genuinely unsettling. There is an entire world of pre-1913 American economic life that has been, if not erased exactly, then allowed to fade. Let me describe it for you. Your great-grandparents, assuming they were working-class or middle-class Americans in the late 19th century, kept everything they earned, minus whatever they chose to spend on tariffed goods. A skilled tradesman in 1890 negotiated his wage with an employer, received that wage, and it was his. Entirely. No withholding, no filing, no April deadline. Homesteaders worked land they could claim under the Homestead Act, 160 acres, essentially free in exchange for improving it. The transaction between a man and his land produced no federal liability. None. Small merchants, craftsmen, farmers, the entire economic ecosystem of pre-industrial and early industrial America operated in a fundamentally different relationship to government. Local taxes existed, property taxes, state levies, but the direct federal claim on individual productive labor, absent by design, constitutional prohibition. The deeper I went, the more I noticed the silence around this fact. It doesn't appear prominently in economics textbooks. It isn't framed as a loss in the standard history curriculum. The pre-1913 world is simply presented as primitive, underfunded, unstable, as if the income tax were medicine for a sick patient, rather than a transformation of a healthy one. Not context, not comparison, not honest acknowledgement of what was surrendered, just silence. Smooth, institutional, well-maintained silence. The silence was deafening. And then they made it a crime. That phrase bears sitting with. Think about what it means. Before 1913, there was no such thing as failure to file. There was no federal crime called tax evasion at the personal income level because there was no personal income tax to evade. The category of criminality simply did not exist. You could not be prosecuted for something that wasn't required. After 1913, a new class of criminal was invented. Not someone who had harmed another person, not someone who had defrauded a specific victim, but someone who had simply failed to accurately report and surrender a portion of their own labor to a centralized authority. This is not a trivial observation. Criminality defines the boundaries of a society. What a civilization chooses to prosecute tells you everything about what that civilization is actually protecting. And here's the strangest part. The criminalization didn't happen all at once. It crept. The Revenue Acts of the 1910s and 1920s quietly expanded penalties. The tax code grew. Withholding, automatic deduction from wages before the worker ever touches the money, wasn't even introduced until 1943. Before that, you still paid annually. You still saw the money first. Withholding changed something psychological. It changed what felt normal. Once the money was removed before you received your paycheck, you stopped thinking of it as yours being taken. You started thinking of your net pay as your pay. The gross became abstract, theoretical, a number on a form rather than money in your hand. not subtraction. Redefinition. The evidence suggests this was understood because the architects of the modern withholding system, introduced notably during wartime when questioning such measures could be framed as unpatriotic, were sophisticated people, treasury economists, policy designers. They understood behavioral economics before behavioral economics had a name, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand, or perhaps instructions they understood perfectly. And here is where the mystery deepens in a way I find impossible to dismiss. The income tax is not an American invention. The British introduced a formal income tax in 1799, temporary for the Napoleonic Wars, then abolished it, reintroduced it in 1842, and made it permanent. Germany built its income tax infrastructure in the 1870s and 1880s. France debated and eventually implemented it in the early 20th century. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all within a roughly similar historical window. Different governments, different political systems, different languages, cultures, legal traditions, and yet the same mechanism spreading across the industrialized world within the same century. The same basic architecture. Individual income reported, calculated, surrendered, enforced criminally. This raises a simple but critical question. What explains that uniformity? You might say modernization. Industrialization created wage labor at scale, which created a taxable income stream that simply hadn't existed when most people were subsistence farmers or craftsmen. Fine, that's a reasonable explanation. But it doesn't explain the timing. It doesn't explain why the mechanisms appear in such similar forms with such similar enforcement structures in countries that were often geopolitical rivals. It doesn't explain why the criminalization follows such a consistent pattern. First the tax, then the bureaucracy, then the penalty structure, then the normalization. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across borders that were otherwise entirely hostile to coordination. Not parallel evolution, not coincidence, not the natural drift of policy ideas. Something more deliberate, something that appears in the documentary record not to have been publicly debated as a global project, and yet somehow arrived at globally similar conclusions. I'm not telling you what that means. I'm asking you to sit with what it implies. Let me describe what I think we've forgotten. Not just the money, though the money is real and the accumulated total surrendered by ordinary families across 5 generations is staggering if you try to calculate it. But the money isn't the deepest loss. The deepest loss is a concept, the concept that what you produce belongs to you, that the labor of your hands, your mind, your time, irreplaceable, non-renewable human time, is yours by a prior claim that precedes any government's claim. That was the assumption built into the original constitutional architecture, not explicitly stated. Assumed. The pre-1913 world didn't have perfect freedom. It had slavery, it had robber barons, it had crushing poverty for many. I'm not romanticizing it, but it contained, embedded in its legal structure, a recognition that the individual's productive output had a protected status. That recognition is now a historical artifact. We didn't lose it in a war. We didn't lose it in a revolution. We surrendered it in a tax bill, incrementally, quietly, with rates so low at first that no one felt it as the permanent transformation it was. I keep returning to that congressional record, that single line. The American citizen has never in the history of this republic been compelled to surrender a portion of his labor directly to the federal government. Written in 1911, 2 years before everything changed, the man who wrote it, a congressman from a Midwestern state now largely forgotten, was making a legal argument against the amendment. He lost. His argument was entered into the record, archived, and left to yellow in a basement for a century until a digitization project pulled it back into the light. He understood what was being built. He saw the architecture for what it was. Did the people who built it understand it too? Did they know they were not merely crafting tax policy, but redesigning the foundational relationship between citizens and the institutions that govern them? Did they anticipate that within 30 years, automatic withholding would make the transaction invisible? Did they foresee the enforcement apparatus, the criminal penalties, the cultural normalization so complete that questioning the income tax would eventually sound like questioning gravity? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But here's what I do know. Your ancestors, not ancient ancestors, not medieval serfs, but your great-grandparents, people whose photographs exist, whose letters survive, whose voices were recorded on early cylinders, lived in a world where keeping what you earned was not a radical proposition. It was just Tuesday. That world ended, officially, legally, constitutionally, in 1913, in 1 year, with one amendment, and then they made it a crime to live as your ancestors had lived. Not an accident, not an oversight, not a necessary evolution, a deliberate architectural decision. The question is not whether it happened. The documents confirm that it did. The question, the one I can't stop asking, the one that keeps me returning to these archives, these transcripts, these forgotten margin notes from men who saw it coming, is simple. Who decided? And when they decided, what exactly did they believe they were building? Because whatever they were building, we are still living inside it. And most of us have never once questioned the walls,